So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's the third this year of the Open Knowledge London meetups. And I'm just going to very quickly give you a short introduction to Open Knowledge, England, Open Knowledge London, and then we're going to move into the talks. I just want to warmly welcome you all here tonight. Thank you for coming. Maybe I think we finished when it's probably an incentive for us all. We can go upstairs and there's a deck to enjoy the sun. First of all, I just very quickly want to say that the kind of coordinators of these events, along with myself, my name is Rufus Collin, is Nick Halliday, Joseph McCarthy, and Yeba. I just don't know if you just put your hand up. This is Jody here. Nick, you just put your hand up. Yeba, just wave there at the back. So you can come talk to any of us. We're the kind of coordinators of this side of Open Knowledge London stuff. If you're interested, for example, in helping organise an event, you want to suggest a theme, you want to get involved in other open knowledge activities, then just come and grab one of us. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about open knowledge and what it is. Who here actually, by the way, already knows, who already heard of open knowledge beforehand? Put up your hand. That's great. There's also people who haven't, which is really valuable. So open knowledge, as an organisation, Open Knowledge, kind of International Open Knowledge Network, was founded, in fact, by me in 2004. It's been around now for nearly 12 years, or in fact, just over 12 years. Its kind of birthday was about 2 weeks ago. And it's a non-profit. And it's Open Knowledge England, which is what this is run under the auspices of, at the moment as a kind of community group, is part of this global network of organisations in the Open Knowledge Network that work and campaign, if you like, and build things to promote open information. And I want to explain this very simple kind of analogy here, which is really what you're part of right now in this room. We'll probably have a discussion about a lot of things, but you're part of I think one of the biggest kind of issues and conversations of the 21st century. In fact, probably, I would argue, maybe the biggest. And in the same way that people who turned up at kind of weird environmental group meetings in like the early 1960s, you know, when environmentalism wasn't really a common topic, certainly even in the 50s, that's what we are here. And there's a really deep analogy there, which is just as environmentalism looked at how we treated this common thing, which is maybe the environment, and in particular how we mistreated it. What we're looking at in this age is how we deal with information. And we're kind of aware that information is important, right? You have smartphones, you go on Facebook, we're even aware that kind of DNA is information, that all that genetic engineering is toying around with information. But it is going to be so much of our societies and economies. And the incredible thing is that that information is different from anything that humans have dealt with before in terms of the substances that they make and consume. Right? Traditionally, for thousands of years, we've made bread, or we've made cars, right? But now we make movies, or we make databases, we make software. And that stuff is different in this fundamental way, which is that it is shareable costlessly. So the very brief story I like to tell is like, who here has heard the story of Hansel and Gretel? Right. So imagine the story of Hansel and Gretel, this starving kids, they go off into the forest, and they're so hungry and they're looking for food, they're not finding it. And then just as they get lost, it's getting dark, and they find this incredible gingerbread house. And even though they are well brought up young children, even though they are poor, these stories, and they know they shouldn't eat somebody else's house, they just can't help themselves. And they feast on this gingerbread. They love gingerbread. They never get to eat gingerbread. And then they're so full, and it's so dark, they fall asleep. And the next morning, Hansel wakes up with a jug. He's like, oh my God, I ate the house. And he looks around, and it's intact again. The house has regenerated its gingerbread. There's no, you can't even see where those bite marks were the previous night. He's like, my God, well, what's going on? And they wait around, there's no one there. So they break off a bunch of gingerbread, they take it back to their village, they start sharing around, they do this. And then one day, though, they turn up at the house, and there's someone home. Right? In fact, there were two sisters. Guess what? They're witches. This is a fairy tale, right? And there's the nice witch, and there's the nasty witch. The nice witch says, look, because they're like, we're so sorry, we didn't mean to impose on your house, but look, you can't even see where we can take anything, it's fine. And the nice witch says, yeah, I see that, and of course, we see that you're really hungry, of course, we love your village to have, gingerbread all the time. But, we have to make a living. You don't understand, magical R&D is expensive. Right? And if we just let you have gingerbread, like everyone else would want free gingerbread too, and before we know it, we wouldn't be able to sell gingerbread to anybody anymore. And it's not even that as well. We've got the student loans from Hogwarts, which is the government's been cutting funding left, right, and centre. It's really expensive now to go to magical university. And then Nasty Witch comes along and throws Nice Witch and says, I don't care if we could find a way anyway. This is ours. We created it. I don't care even if we could find a way. I want to retire rich. I've worked hard for this. I want to retire to a nice magical castle somewhere. And anyway, and I'll tell you something, if you think that you can copy our gingerbread house, if you think that you could work out how to make your own, you've got another thing coming. We've got to deal with the prince. We supply all his banquets for free, and in exchange, no one else is allowed to make magical gingerbread around here. Hansel will go home sadder and wiser. So the point of this story, I hope, is obvious. That we have stumbled upon a magical gingerbread house. Right? And right now, the way we're going is the way of the nice or the nasty witch, basically. And this thing that could feed everyone, that could really change the way the 21st century is run. I'll just give you a couple of examples now. Right now, we are excluding people from. And we are denying the possibilities of information age in a huge scale. I'll say a couple. One, inequality. If we do nothing and we let people own the magical gingerbread house, if you like, have exclusive proprietary control, we are in for the greatest level of inequality and concentration of wealth and power this planet has ever seen. The power that comes from controlling information, the wealth that comes from it is extraordinary. Who is the richest today? Is Bill Gates. And it's because he controls information monopoly of a hugely lucrative kind. Similarly, Facebook, Google, you name it. So when we talk here about Tasha, we're talking about inequality. One of the biggest drivers of inequality probably already is the way the information world works. Because just as everyone can have gingerbread for free, if you control the gingerbread and you can charge for it, it's all profit. It is the information monopoly capitalism that we may get is of the most extreme casino kind that you can imagine. But on the alternative, we have, I don't want to call it Marx 2.0, but you have basically something beyond capitalism and socialism, a world in which the means of production, which information is commonly owned, openly. But it's one that's beyond, because it's one that combines innovation, it combines market-based solutions with that. Similarly, if you look at creativity or just even freedom, there's already evidence that Google could change elections. Really great research in the last 2 or 3 years showing that Google's, by what it puts in its search results, could determine, for example, the EU referendum. Undecided voters, which will probably determine that road, depending on what they see on Google web pages, can change their mind. That algorithm, and I'm not necessarily talking about Google itself must be kind of nationalized, but the algorithm, the information underlying it, should be open. And that is what open knowledge exists basically to do, is to make an open information age. That's the vision, that all public information is open. Editors are recognized and supported. And by public, by the way, here, I don't mean government. I mean all information that you could legitimately give someone else. I'm not talking about opening up your health records or your tax records necessarily. Depends, it depends on your corporation maybe, but I'm talking about information that can be legitimately accessible by anyone for free or for a fee. Anything that we could sell to anybody today is information should be open. And everything that can be bits, and therefore, and I'm going to skip through, but I'd say, in terms of how we do that, we've got to get government and others to change policies. One point in the Ginsburg story, by the way, is that Nice Witch isn't wrong. She did have to go to, well, whether she had to go to Hogwarts is a good question, I've forgotten the French one now, but, she could have gone to another university, but it does cost money to create information. I'm not claiming that information just magically grows on trees, but once it is there, new copies do magically grow on trees. Once we have one Ferrari, everyone could have a Ferrari. Now it's true that making the first Ferrari is expensive, and we have to think about that. And we have ways, these things are called public goods, and we funded them centuries. In fact, the reason why so much, that well-known socialist utopia called the United States, I hope people got the slight sarcasm there. For example, funds half of all medical research, all medical information, like research on drugs, on cancer, half of all of that is funded by the state in the United States already, and that's because people realize that information is different. The other half is funded incredibly inefficiently by basically monopoly drug companies, who basically spend who receive $6 for every $1 they actually spend inventing medicine. Right? What the other $5 go on is a good question. Now, and I just want to then say, what do we do at Open Knowledge is we want to change minds, we want to change policy. On the one side, on the top down, so these events, if you like, obviously people are not come and talk, I think, but to change policy, we need to change mentality. It's a long-term process, like environmentalism. And we need to create structured, sustainable organization that can perform advocacy and engage in change making. And finally, we can engage in quite a lot of opening up material directly. Legitimately, I have to emphasize we have never been on the kind of WikiLeaks end. I'm not happy to debate the merits or not, but we open up information, if you like, legitimately. Much as some of us sometimes think the excitement of more guerrilla approach would be interesting, we only open up data sets that we can legitimately do so. And I want to say you can get involved. Come and get involved. Come and make an open information age. And on that, I have one last thing, a couple of things therefore to say on that. Just very quickly, I want to mention this, which is, for those of you really interested, I am running, along with Irina Bolashevsky, who's an open data expert, the Open Knowledge Leaders Program in Berlin on the 16th and 17th of July. It will be a 2-day intensive kind of training for people who want to take leadership in this kind of area. And leadership doesn't mean unless you're running things, it's about developing, inspiring others. If you want to really play a role or learn more in terms of what you're doing inside your organization, in terms of this, if you want to become simply a better leader, this will take place. It's a weekend, Saturday, Sunday. Berlin is wonderful in July. And it starts on the Friday evening, and then it will be followed by virtual classrooms to support you in running if you want to do a project or do stuff inside your organization. So it's over 40 or 50 hours. The classrooms are voluntary, if you like, but there'll be over 40 hours of support, tuition, and coaching in this program. And it's also very, very good value. It's about 150 euros only to participate. I retention tries to be very low. So Berlin in July 16th and 17th, please, if you're interested, come and talk to me or sign up on the website, leaders.rufuspollock.org. And so with that, one last thing I want to mention, which is just updates, which I wanted to start doing, which is, please also tell me your updates if you have things you want to mention. But I just want to mention in terms of government stuff, the government planning to privatize the land registry, which, as you might know, actually contains some very important information, like who owns land in the UK. And, for example, at the moment, currently only makes a very limited amount of its data open. It basically makes its price paid data open. It doesn't make its actual ownership. For example, The Guardian recently did a wonderful story looking at who owned flats in a very expensive development just happening in London. London has a major housing crisis, as you know. It's very expensive to live in London. Anyone who lives there. And, many of these flats are being sold to shell companies or very, very rich individuals, and they probably had to go and buy individual items of that data from Land Registry. Many other countries make their land registry data open. The government's thinking of privatising it. It's both completely stupid on a basic economic basis, or most of what we know about privatisation, likely to not lead to one of the great studies of privatisation found very few welfare benefits of it. Open data and other things are serious risk. We put in a strongly worded argument against this, but it's the kind of thing that open knowledge does, is write responses to these things. And you can read more about that. That's now happened. And then secondly, the local government. So local government transparency. There's consultation on what local government transparency code. So what local government should be doing in relation to transparency and openness of information. I'm not sure, maybe Paul was here, I'm not sure exactly when it closes, but I think quite relatively soon.
Have a look at the link.
So this is going on right now, and local governments often think matters most. What is your local government spending money on? Providing, etc. And also, if you have an announcement in the future, please let us know. You can email us in advance or whatever, and we'll mention it. So without more ado, I want to welcome our first speaker for tonight. And I'm going to bring up, so I'd like him to kind of make his way up here. So from The Guardian, know about us. And I'm really privileged, I just want to say tonight, we're slightly changing the format of these evenings, people come forward, and we're going to have fewer presentations, which are longer and more in-depth. And we're really grateful tonight, particularly actually to Nick, who coordinated this, but to all of our speakers. We've already got a great lineup who are going to talk about open data and tax justice. I think it's an area that's very much in the news, but also an area where transparency is clearly of really direct relevance and importance in both enabling to know what's going on, but in driving change. So thank you very much. Let me end a short round. Thank you very much. We'll clap at the end. That's so there we go. So, let me know of any technical issues. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Simon Bowers. I'm from The Guardian. And I was asked to come along. I worked on the Panama Papers, stuck in a dark room for many months, pouring through a lot of that data, enormous amount of data there. And just as an aside before I start, I was going to, obviously on the topic of open data, there are groups making some interesting points about that boundary between we want as much out there as possible, but equally we want it to be. There are perhaps particular areas where people feel uncomfortable with it. Now, the Panama Papers it's stolen or leaked data. This is not got by polite requests. I throw it out there. I don't particularly have any strong opinions myself, but there are people who feel that the whole leaked information should have just been put in raw format. It's 2 terabytes on the web, and hand it over to citizen journalists. Off you go. Now you might say, well, I would resist that because it's my job to sort of sift and edit and scrutinise that. But there was. It gets down to the level of people's bank account numbers, passports, very personal information. So I think you have to be quite a radical militant person if you believe that level of data, confidential data, could be put out there. But anyway, if anyone's got any thoughts on that, let me know. I don't, like I say, I think the idea of a citizen journalist sort of like army of worker ants sort of descending on that data, in many respects that might be terrific. Then again, it might create just a load of white noise that, the more pertinent elements or the more insightful elements might just disappear. I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear. What I was going to actually talk about is, and on the subject of what document from the Panama Papers I can talk about, all the media organisations involved in that have had sort of not threatening at the moment, sort of polite letters from the tax authorities around the world and other investigative authorities of state and court-appointed administrators and asset tracers. You know, these officialdom want to scrutinise the data, and the decision has been made again, perhaps controversially, that won't be permitted. There'll be the group of journalists are going to resist that, and that's because it's felt that there was that might throw a sort of hostage to fortune, and eventually you lose the arm's length distance between the journalistic enterprise and, you know, the edge to state. Anyway, I wanted to talk you through a couple of examples of the cases I looked at, which I think are sort of interesting in an openness question, because this is a particular peculiarity that was thrown up about how offshore works with and engages with criminality and money laundering, and it's, you know, all the people in these chains, or a lot of the people in these chains of offshore companies are lawyers, and, you know, lawyers don't, in the main, they don't like to have their fingerprints on overt criminality. So there's a problem here. How do they deal with that? And a crude way, that a simple way of looking at it from a sort of bird's eye picture, is that they ensure that they have sight of only narrow segment of the overall picture. Once they get to overview of a scheme that involves criminality, obviously professionally disastrous for them. So these are two examples. One from deep in history, one from more recently. The chap on the left is Gordon Parry. He was the sort of offshore. He led in the 1980s. If anyone remembers the 1980s, the Brink's-Mat robbery, huge. It was the biggest gold bullion robbery ever in Britain. It was gold. 26 million of bullion was robbed at gunpoint from a depot in Heathrow, and the robbers escaped, and they were very quickly caught. But the gold and the money launderers were sort of age. That chase went on for decades, and it became a sort of popular story. It kept a lot of journalists in business. Some crime journalists, you know, made their careers out of just reporting these cases. As these launderers fell out with each other and started shooting each other. It was all unseemly. But anyway, this chap Gordon Parry was the key guy. Once the gold had been smelted and turned into cash, it was shipped offshore, and then and the key players in the conspiracy were living a high life, including himself, and he was a pioneer in offshore money laundering from the UK perspective. The chap on the right, Geoffrey Reed, I'll come to later, but he's a sort of modern day version, more sophisticated. So, I don't know. Anyway, never mind. That's gone there again. So these are the points. The robbers were quickly caught. Launderers and the gold itself was harder to trace. Parry pushed 10 million through offshore accounts, and they were living a high life. And it wasn't, and so the robbery was in '83. It wasn't until 1990 that Parry was finally brought to justice. And this is what the prosecution at his trial had to say of Parry. You know, they're prosecuting him. There's little short of brilliant. They've got a grudging admiration for him. The judge said there's never been a more serious case of handling stolen goods. There was at that time no criminal offence of money laundering, and in fact that was potentially one of the reasons why that offence was brought in was this case. So Gordon Parry, he's a son of a bookmaker. He had a criminal record for smuggling cannabis you know, he's at the fringes of organised crime. You know, how does he set up, you know, offshore web of companies? Well, this chap Michael Relton, he defended him in his cannabis case, and they became close. And he basically was bent and started working for these criminal guys. And he contacted a firm in Jersey, and who contacted Mossack Fonseca, which is the company at the centre of all the Panama Papers. So the purpose of showing this chain is that, you know, each step removed, the level of Parry instructs, Relton instructs, Jersey instructs Panama. So at each stage down the chain, the level of knowledge is narrowed, so that the guys in Panama and Jersey are able to say, well, you know, I only did this, I was instructed, all I did was set up a company. What that company did, I didn't really know. And the purpose of the company was to buy actually Parry's house for him and his family. This was at the centre of a case when he eventually was convicted. Is in Kent, and his family still actually own it somehow, mysteriously. But it was great press at the time, because they sort of, everyone knew these were the guys who had the gold, but they couldn't pin it on them. And they you know, a wife of one of the robbers bought 2 Rottweilers and named them Brinks and Matt, and Parry himself gold-plated the taps in all his bathrooms. There was all they thought it was a lark, basically, and no one could touch them because of this magic of going offshore, washing their money. And then, then there came. Yeah, so this is that chain again of people contacting, but then. Eventually the police do catch up with them, and in particular, Michael Relton is caught, the crooked solicitor, and he's awaiting jail, trial there in jail, and Gordon Parry himself is also, the police are after him, he flees to Spain. These guys in Jersey, a jurisdiction that is, even in the 80s, a little bit, a step up the chain of grubbiness from Panama. Don't get Panama at this stage, this is Noriega, this is a narco state. Jersey guys freak out completely. So they're about to disappear. And so Mossack Fonseca, what do? This is 80s behaviour. You wouldn't see, I don't think, I mean, having looked through all these things, I don't think you'd see this today. Because what they do, what they would do today is they would run a mile, they'd drop everything, we knew nothing, resign the account, it's over, and everything we do know, which we've carefully kept all the paperwork to a minimum, we've handed it to the authorities. But here, in the 80s, you know, these were the sort of golden days for these guys. And so these guys want to resign, and Mossack Fonseca see an opportunity. Even though Parry is on the run, they see an opportunity. So this is how the company works. That's the house in Kent. It's owned by this Panamanian company, which is owned by bearer shares. So shares that don't have any names on them, but they're kept in a sort of safe in Jersey. And the lawyers in Jersey have an agreement that only Gordon Parry can have those. And these are the directors of this company. You can see they're basically all nominees, and they're split between Panama and the Sark. You know, it's a neighbouring island of Jersey and the Channel Islands. You know, very, very out of the way place with its own obscure laws. So, you know, this whole setup is designed to, you know, what's Kent got to do with Sark, Jersey, Panama? It's all designed to keep a layer of secrecy impossible to penetrate. But then the Jersey firm is raided. This ownership chain is broken. The Sark directors need to resign, so only Mossack Fonseca is left connected to the company. And indeed, the police have even seized these two bearer shares. The only shares in issue the company are in the hands of the police. So it looks like all is lost. But then, Mossack Fonseca, in combination with Gordon Parry, come up with this incredible plan. What they do is they bring in a sort of friendly fellow Panamanian company who also become directors and replace those guys from SARC. And even though all the shares in issue, that is the owners of the company, those shares are back in the Met Police in Scotland Yard, that they convince themselves that under Panamanian law, they can simply issue 98 new shares. And 98, well, we've got ownership back of the company. And I mean, it's the most, I mean, it goes against any sort of common sense of corporate probity. I mean, it's Alice in Wonderland stuff. Anyway, this is all been hatched by Parry, who's on the run in Fuengirola in the south of Spain, under a false passport, in communication with Mossack Fonseca in Panama. So it's a pretty audacious plan. But eventually it all crumbled, and Parry ran out of money, and the police got on his trail in Spain. He was brought back, and it all. But that gives you a sense of the layers of secrecy. One thing I just want to before I move on to the other example, one thing I want to emphasise is just going back a bit to the initial structure. What is really neat about this is if you look at the stuff in purple is Mossack and is Fonseca and is in Panama, is in Jersey or the Channel Islands, let's say. Now, the Jersey grouping are clearly able to say, if anyone comes knocking, well, look, it's a Panamanian company. Its registered agent is in Panama. You know, it's the director who set it up is in Panama. We don't really know what this does. And equally in Panama, if someone comes knocking there, they can say, well, you know, we were told to set it up by these guys in Jersey. And so there's that neat cutthroat defence that they've both got. No one, it's plausible deniability on both parts. And you see that again. So this is. Yeah, sorry. It's a race example.
It's great. Just one question on what were the why did the plausible deniability? Who did it work on? Did it work on English courts? Like who would go and apply to them and say, hey, I mean, because normally they would know, like everyone would know a little bit that they knew, because it's like no one incredibly believed that. But would it be that English courts would believe this? I mean, what would go off? Is it the Jersey courts that would enforce this? So, Met Police would go and apply in Jersey and say, tell us all the paperwork, tell us who owns this and what's going on.
Well, that is what happened. The Met put pressure on Jersey, and there was a court order in Jersey to raid the Jersey firm. But obviously the situation in getting information from Panama was very difficult.
But the Jersey guys, you're saying the advantage of plausible deniability. Why can't you, what would the Jersey solicitor firm, Jet or the law firm, really pleased that they just didn't know what was going on?
They did up to that point. Yeah, they did, and they weren't prosecuted. And they could say, well, they were acting for Michael Relton, who was a solicitor. They had no reason up until he was in jail. They had no reason to assume that the end client that Michael was acting for was someone who happened to be a media reporter.
I got you, but then why divide? You just said the great beauty was that you've split the control between the SARC and Panama. So I was going to ask that before, you then explain why that was. But if you already had plausible deniability by just saying, hey, we were just acting for Michael Relton, why not have the SARC guys be all of the directors? Why split it? What does it buy you in plausible deniability?
Well, I mean,
because for example, you already had that from Michael.
Yeah, well, for example, the more people who you can say in a room, well, I thought you knew what was going on. well, I thought you knew what was going on. So that's the.
And they pleaded that there, that's what I'm saying. Did they plead that in that case?
Well, there was no prosecution against the Jersey companies. They couldn't prove that they had knowledge of what was going on. Yeah. Okay, so let's see it another. Now, this is winding forward now. This is the mid-2000s, and this top guy is an Australian character called Geoffrey Rebel Reed, and that's Anthony May, below him, a Essex lawyer who moved to Switzerland and Spain, spent his time there. They are the Europe. I think they're Europe's largest boiler room fraudsters. If you know what boiler room fraud is, just to explain it quickly, what it is it targets amateur stock market investors, and it's a pop-up firm who cold call effectively have some amount of savings and to be dabbling on the stock market, and they hard sell them with bogus promises. They sell them worthless shares that they secretly own or someone near them owns, and it's not until, and then they say you can't sell them until a year, but they're going to be worth huge amounts in a year or so, and they're terrifically successful. And of course, by the time you've realised that you've been duped, the firm's disappeared. That pop-up firm's gone, and it will reappear as another firm with a new name and some new worthless shares to block. And this guy, Geoffrey Rebel Reed, he was a past master. I mean, he has been connected by the regulators for decades. I mean, he's just an absolutely fascinating figure. And together with Anthony May, they were in this orbit of people in the offshore world. They were prolific in setting up offshore companies. The maze of companies is just staggering, and all of them really unconnected with any material business that you could possibly understand as legitimate. So there are more than 1,000 fraudsters taken in, 4 victims taken in. They from whom they took 70 million in total, and so I've been through that. Yeah, so I think I've summarised those points. Yeah. Now this is the company structure, and I wanted to sort of show echoes. So this company here is the so when one nasty element is they particularly targeted at the elderly, people sort of less sophisticated with online, doing some simple elementary online checks, but might have a bit of savings, retired people dabbling on the stock market. And so that once they've done the hard sell, they've got the credit card number, and they're pushing the payment through. The phone goes down in the UK. They happen to be based in Spain. It's called boiler room fraud pop-up firm. Then the money went to this company, Globe Trade Services, and it went, I mean, in huge volumes. And I'll show you how much later. But this company was set up at the request of an intermediary, a lawyer in Hong Kong. And it was set up by Mossack Fonseca in the BVI, and Mossack Fonseca it hosted the company effectively. So it provided the registered address for the company, and it provided the sort of local sort of stamp of regulatory approval. It's the registered agent in the BVI. So Mossack Fonseca in the BVI set up this company. And what did they actually know when they set it up? Well, they were told to set it up by Hong Kong, a guy in Hong Kong, one man and his dog outfit in Hong Kong, and the sole director and shareholder of the company was a shell company in Belize, registered to a post office box address. So, really a complete dead end in terms of like understanding the provenance of of this country. And the only other sort of named entity, or there was no individual named, was a company secretary, which was also a firm, which was also registered to a PO box, and that was in Samoa. So you've got Hong Kong, Samoa, and Belize, but you don't really, the massive secrecy jurisdictions, but you don't know anything about this country, nothing at all in truth. And what was going on there was this. So you've got the UK amateur investors, and this is over 13 months, so just over a year, 27 million was washed through this company, and washed right through, and spat out. It had a bank account in Hong Kong, but the money just poured through it and out into these either other shells or accounts around the world. Effectively, it sort of boomeranged from Europe out to Hong Kong and then back into ultimately the pockets of this fraudster gang. There were many jurisdictions, highly sophisticated, all with deep knowledge of how offshore works. So how could Mossack Fonseca have possibly known? And this is why this particular game, because what I've said up to now is sort of depressingly typical, unfortunately. I mean, the numbers are large, but the sort of ignorance of what the company does and who's behind the company is typical and willfully typical of how the MO of a company like Mossack Fonseca. So, this is why we like this. We liked this story was because one of the pensioners, it was actually a retired brewer from Lancashire, was really persistent, and he was really upset about this. He really freaked out. He put the phone down. He spent a lot of money, and he said, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And I think in the end he ended up sort of mortgaging his house to finance these share sales. He was buying worthless shares. Anyway, so he writes this email to and he somehow he can't get hold of the pop-up company because it's popped up and disappeared. But he's got some of his paperwork. He's found out that his money actually went to this BVI company. He's found out the BVI company is administered by Mossack Fonseca. So he writes an email to Mossack Fonseca. He said, "I'm concerned to find out if the business is genuine. There are alerts on the internet about Pricestone," that's the pop-up company, "and they can be found on google.com. Now, I mean, you see the sort of language, google.com, who talks about that? I mean, it's a language that's not very sophisticated online, but nevertheless, the markings on it are also particularly interesting, because those are the markings of Mossack Fonseca. This is an email that's appeared, it's been printed out, and it's been circled and underlined. So Mossack Fonseca is clearly, it's had a massive flag that this is a huge fraud. And if you do Google, at that time, this was sent in late 2005, if you do Google, the Financial Services Authority in the UK put out an alert saying, UK citizens, there's this company called Pricestone, we believe it's deeply suspect, don't buy any shares from it. And so, but we don't know if they actually did actually go and do these Google searches. And there's alerts about Anthony May saying, he's involved in multiple suspect pop-up boiler rooms in Spain. So the evidence is absolutely out there, but they appear to have circled it, but they don't do anything about it. They just bury their heads, or they make some checks, but and it is evidence. To be fair to them, there is evidence in the file. The evidence is the check that they make is they go to the company and say, "What do you know about this?" And they go to Hong Kong. They send an email to the intermediary in Hong Kong. That's the only person they know who they've ever had an email or any contact with about this company. And the email comes back saying, from the Hong Kong intermediary, says, "Our client has told us that this is a disgruntled person who's made a mistake about having bought a service from the company, and we've contacted them and cleared the matter up." And that's enough for Mossack. They can then return to their sort of blissful ignorance. And it's that ignorance of what's going on that is so attractive and ultimately lucrative for Mossack. And so, so the Czechs allow them to return to the status quo, and huge amounts of money continue to pour through and then I was just going to make one last point, which is that so then what happened is the sort of cruelest twist of all to this story is that, and this is more another sort of typical element, is that the email that arrived from the Lancashire brewer, he sent letters as well, but he wasn't the only one. There were lots of people who discovered that their money was going to this address in Tortola in the BVI, and dozens and dozens of these letters came. But by that stage, Mossack Fonseca had set up a mail forwarding service. All these letters that arrived. Now, I don't know what was in them, but you can see that they're written in sort of spindly copperplate handwriting that suggests an elderly correspondent. And some of them are from UK law firms. They're all from the UK. It looks like they're sort of fraud victims who are trying to find out desperately what's going on. They arrive at the address of the company, and they're simply put back in the post again and shipped off to Hong Kong, where obviously a person in the fraud gang is going to shred them or destroy them. It's not going to. But that of course it completes the circle of restoring the carefully delineated knowledge that Mossack can have, and it's that silo knowledge that jigsaws with other jurisdictions, and Mossack itself works in multiple jurisdictions and will build those that jigsaw for you in very helpful structures, whilst maintaining the Chinese walls between their own offices. And I think that's an important element to this offshore story that I thought was relevant for today, because it's sort of about talking about the knowledge being power, but actually, bizarrely, their power is by sort of keeping knowledge siloed and not just from the outside world, but from each other. And I thought that was a point worth making. Anyway, I've rambled for too long, but brilliant. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, you dashed up, we have a chance for questions, but we'll maybe bring those all together at the end. That's really great, because you're right. Let me just bring up the other one of these. So I think this is our one next. I just wanted to say, actually, a good segue. Please come on up, because I'll just talk as you come. I'm really excited to welcome you both.
This is the last one.
This is the last. This is the last. That's right. Beforehand. Ruined the whole. So, Melissa and Natasha, I'm really glad to welcome you. And I think please come on around. I'm just going to say, I think it's a great segue there, because one thing I think, you talked about transparency at the end, and we talk about it here. I think one of the things is, well, their plan may have come from Deep Secret. Obviously, if you'd known about a bunch of information, for example, even now I think they get in trouble in Nevada for having basically lied about their relationship. Ultimately, these people do lie at some point. They normally claim something that actually, if you had evidence, for example, about company ownership. And also the other point I think you made is, why do these endless boxes work? Because it's costly to break through each box. It's possible, but it takes time. If that could be done instantaneously or incredibly quickly, it would be much less effective. If you could root through all of these different companies that own companies that own companies, it would be a very different world. Anyway, so that brings us to you guys at Tax Treaties. So thank you very much. And also, I'll let you all just invite you to introduce yourselves a tiny bit right at the beginning. Thank you very much.
Shall we first? Okay, so we're kind of going to tag team this. I'm Natasha Adams, and I'm the tax campaign manager at ActionAid. I work with
Louisa Muller. I do international research and policy writing.
Yeah, so our example is quite different. We have been campaigning on tax since 2008, and we focus our campaigning on corporate tax dodging and trying to stop big businesses tax dodging in developing countries. And this isn't about illegal things that are happening that are flowing through offshore. This is all about the actual rules of the game and how big companies are kind of using the tax structures that exist in order to get away with that.
Can we just check, just on the onset, how many people in here have ever heard about a tax treaty before we came up on the screen today? Nice, okay, so a bit more than half. So there are almost 3,000 treaties, actually today more than 3,000 treaties in place between countries that decide where countries can incur tax multinational corporations. And I think this is an interesting point that Simon made, that if you stay far enough away from a legal structure or an illegal structure, you might not be able to say whether something is right or wrong, and you might be able to detach yourself from that. Similarly, if there are 3,000 agreements rather than one that decide when the country can and cannot tax, you can also end up with so much information in a way that you can't process or can't access, but this also becomes an opaque area. And that's something that we now want to change, especially in terms of low and low middle incomes' right to claim their fair share of tax from multinationals.
Yeah, so basically we're going to talk a little bit about why the rules of the game are a tax justice issue. We're going to touch on how we campaign for change and some of the campaign that we've done. We're going to introduce our tax treaties data set, which is a load of data that we have put out there. So I wanted to start off talking about why we campaign on tax. So these figures are not to do specifically with tax treaties. There are so many big numbers thrown around. This is the one that we use and that we think is the most credible, but it's an estimate. So this is the IMF estimating what they think corporate tax dodging costs developing countries. And yeah, I mean, compared to the amount it costs the UK, it's a huge problem. And that's why we started campaigning on this, basically, because we see it as being a sustainable alternative to aid funding and a way that development can be a thing that can happen sustainably. So one of the things that we are quite well known for doing is that we've done some really amazing investigative exposés. I consider they're amazing. I haven't done them. These are my very friendly policy colleagues, like Lavissa, that have worked on these things. So this is one that we did on Zambia Sugar, which is a subsidiary of Associated British Foods. I'm going to come back to talking about that a little bit later on. They own Primark, they own Twinings Tea, loads of brands that you know about. And basically what our expose showed was that this subsidiary of this huge multinational company that was making a huge amount of money in Zambia, which is not a wealthy country, they were paying less tax than a market stallholder that we spoke to that was selling their product, their sugar, down the road, because she was paying some tax and they were paying nothing. It's not that she was paying more proportionally, she was actually paying more. And they did this via a combination of tax breaks that they negotiated and also by tax treaties. And they actually structured their business to take advantage of tax treaties to lower their tax bill. And so, yeah, tax treaties have become one of the major focuses of the International Tax Power Campaign. I've got colleagues, we're one of 25 countries that is campaigning on tax now around the world since we started in the UK in 2008. And treaties are a major focus, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So just going to give a couple of other examples. So this wasn't really an expose, basically found a Prezi online that Deloitte had left there, that they'd given some Western and Chinese investors, and they were talking about how to reduce what they call tax suffered in Mozambique. And Mozambique is not a wealthy country. I know that that's how these things are talked about, but the idea of reducing tax suffered in Mozambique is pretty horrendous. And the way that they were advising they did this is because Mauritius, which is a tax haven, has negotiated lots of quite favourable treaties with African countries, so they were being advised to structure their business via Mauritius, which would reduce the amount of tax they had to pay. And Deloitte didn't, I mean, it was a media story when this came out, because there's so much outrage about tax dodging and all this stuff generally, but Deloitte didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing, because they were just following the rules. So, yeah, let's swap out.
And there are many more issues, many more companies that we could mention. I think one of the reasons why this hasn't really become an issue for a lot of justice campaigners here is simply because we don't see the connection to the rules of the game in the stories. So when people talk about Google not paying their fair share in the UK, Amazon not paying their fair share in the UK, they might be following the rules. But then why are the rules the way they are? Why aren't we doing more to question the rules of the game? So for Amazon and Google, for example, the right to decide when you book your profits, that's regulated by tax treaty. If we want to actually start questioning how things are run, we need to start questioning the rules as well. So a quick background for those of you that weren't familiar with this concept. So tax treaties, I think of them as rules of the game when it comes to taxing multinational corporations. They're agreements between two countries. They're bilateral normally, with few exceptions. And they divide up where a multinational should and should not pay tax. Now, that sounds fairly standard, and there are about 1,500 treaties in force between developed and the developing countries. So there is a wealth of number of deals that have been made in this area. So what's the problem? Well, the balance of taxing rights has to be decided when you sign on to an agreement like this. The whole idea is that when one country gets to tax, the other country doesn't get to tax. And the reason why Mauritius comes up is because Mauritius claims the right to tax that they don't use anyway, basically creating a tax haven for companies to use and take advantage of. So the balance of taxing rights was set largely by a model treaty, so a template for how these deals can be made, written by the OECD, a group of wealthy industrialized countries. And to a little surprise, then a lot of the rights to tax have been assigned to the country that's investing, not a country like Mozambique, for example, that has a lion's share of investment going in, Mozambican money going out. And yeah, the use of tax treaties and tax avoidance schemes has increasingly brought our attention to this area. And the fact that tax treaties push down taxes in developing countries, a little known fact in the NGO world, but something that the IMF has highlighted cost countries billions of dollars each year. So in their own words, treaty shopping, this is the use of tax treaty network to minimize tax payments. So artificial tax avoidance, structuring your company to capture taxes using tax treaties. This is a major issue for many developing countries, which would be well advised to sign treaties only with considerable caution.
Okay, so yeah, this is a piece of really good news that we have recently that's linked to our international tax campaign. So the Sweet Nothings report that I mentioned, the expose on about Zambia sugar not paying its tax in Zambia, and yeah, there's some of the brands that Associated British Foods own. They were actually avoiding an estimated $10.4 million, and that's enough to pay for 18,000 children in Zambia to attend school, which in a country where education enrollment is the biggest by could be people on education, a significant amount of money, the tax treaty got. After this report, Zambia and I renegotiated the treaty, and the clause that allowed them to do a substantial chunk of this doesn't exist anymore. So it's been consigned to the history books, which is great. So it really shows that these are things that, because there are so many of these agreements, it's not about having to have a big fix of the international rules, which we're also pushing for. So it means that there are things that individual countries and governments can do.
And this sort of campaigning and successful campaigning has been going on in several countries, but maybe a little bit less so here in Europe. A couple of other examples from our colleagues and allies, especially in Africa, in several African countries where this has been a big issue, where Kenyan activists have sued several members of their government for their involvement in the Kenya-Mauritius Treaty, where activists and NGO members in Uganda has managed to get their Commissioner for Tax Policy to commit to no longer signing on to treaties unless there is a clear idea about what's in it for Uganda and what is good for Uganda. So there is a civil society debate and a political debate going on, but maybe not as much here in the UK as in other countries. And this is something that we really hope to change.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the campaign that we've been running in the UK, and it's not the only one actually that's running campaigns on tax treaties in lots of different countries in the north and south. And in the UK, we're campaigning for the government to look at all of its tax treaties and take development principles into account. But we started campaigning in collaboration with Action Aid Malawi. They're really strong on tax justice. They were really keen to work with us. And yet, it's the world's poorest country, and public services are in a properly sorry state. There's only a few hundred doctors for the Malawian that are working for the state for a population of 16 million people, and that's how many people are on the books. There's quite a lot of people off the books as well. The average class size in first grade is about 130 children. It's got one of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the world, and we have a pretty terrible treaty with that. So the tax treaty that we have with Malawi is so old, it wasn't even in the data set that we actually looked at, which Melissa will talk about in a little bit, which was from 1970 onwards. So it was actually signed by the colonial governor of Nyasaland, South Rhodesia and North Rhodesia. So the countries that don't even exist anymore. It's pretty ridiculous that this thing still stands. Malawi's not a wealthy country, but the UK is the third biggest investor in Malawi. So we think that there's a significant amount of money. It's not going to be game changing, but it's significant. And the treaty basically repeatedly bans Malawi from taxing money that UK companies are taking out of the country. So we have been campaigning since February. We've done a whole bunch of stuff. This has been a proper collaboration with the office in Malawi. So there's been public campaigning, policy work, advocacy work, and lots of media happening in both countries. So we've had more than 30,000 campaigners in the UK and Malawi have taken campaigning action. On the right, that's Activista, our youth activist network, delivering their petition to a local area representative to pass on to the finance minister, asking this treaty to be renegotiated fairly. We've had tons of media in the UK. We've got Labour and SNP have been really, really supportive. We have got some Conservatives. The Conservatives have been less supportive. And it's been a real problem. One of the things that this has really highlighted, and that we're kind of calling for to happen with all UK treaties, is that this is a very untransparent process. You can't see the negotiations of treaties. And we've been asking lots of parliamentary questions about this. We're starting to get problems with the tabling of this. I think that they're getting some pressure put on them. But the texts aren't available online. We've been told that negotiated now, and it's getting very close to being signed, but we don't know what's in the text. We don't know what provisions have changed from the treaty before. So we're actually running campaign action at the moment, asking people to email their MPs, asking their MPs to write to David Gauke, who's the minister responsible for this. And we're kind of having a massive push on this at the moment. So we're calling for transparency around the negotiation of tax treaties in the UK and in Malawi. And we're calling for development principles to be taken into account, and for all of the UK's treaties to be revised to look at development impacts. And one of the things that we found with the research we've done is that the UK actually comes bottom of the pile for tax treaties that are the most restrictive for developing countries. So we have 13 of most tax treaties are restrictive in terms of north-south for development, but we've got 13 treaties which are much worse than the norm. And so the UK comes joint bottom with Italy, which is quite embarrassing, and hopefully we're going to change.
And finding out these type of facts, knowing how one country benchmarks against another, and knowing why an international corporation might have chosen a certain structure, that is something that we felt that we needed to be able to address. So we worked with a great researcher. If you guys work in tax justice in London, you probably know him, Martin Harrison. And together we have been able to make more than 500 treaties that have been signed by some of the world's poorest countries open to public scrutiny for the first time. Now, we have coded these treaties led by Martin, and we have checked which of these treaties that allow for a source country, so the country where an investment takes place to tax, and the investor country, the country that makes the investment or basically hosts a letterbox, which country gets the right to tax. And all of these more than 500 treaties have been coded for loads of different aspects that basically sets one treaty aside from another. We check where the biggest problems are, and we can also check that, okay, if we know of one tax avoidance opportunity, such as through the Panama Papers, there was a lot of talk about the emails that leaked regarding Heritage Oil, especially in Ugandan media, as it was a Ugandan investment, and how a tax treaty with Mauritius allegedly was a second line of defense in their tax planning strategy. So we can then quickly check, and our Ugandans can quickly check which other treaties could have a similar impact and which other countries could be affected of these type of relations with Mauritius. So this is how we've used the data and why we've created it. But we also hope that it will be useful to many other actors. We've already gotten a lot of response from a very researchy communities of more of an academic community, but we also hope that this can be useful for more political actors or for people that simply want to be able to engage with tax justice and the UK's role in tax justice. So we've also launched a site called taxtreaties.taxpower.org. It is for people that might be less keen on Excel and more keen on interactive maps. That goes to the top line information, but it basically singles out the bottom half of the tax treaties and highlights the problems in them. So, well, with this, we hope that we can spark a little bit more information into the tax and the rules of the game discussions. I hope that this could also be useful to some of your future work going forward. So if there's anything in this that you found a bit interesting, or if there are questions that might have arisen, then we'll also be around after the talk. But maybe we should wait for now.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do actually, I'm going to say make a space and we'll all, I think although people are saying different places, we can direct questions in a kind of in a group way at the end if that works. But just brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that joke about President. I don't know if people know the joke about Lyndon. Does everyone know who Lyndon Johnson was? Does anyone know President Ford? He was supposed to be Nixon's kind of insurance against impeachment. And he always wanted vice president, but no one wants as president. That's his logic. You know what went wrong for Nixon? You know, was his previous vice president got impeached for corruption before he got impeached. So he had, you know, he had a less bad one. It was Spiro Agnew, who was just known as so corrupt that no one ever wanted him as president. But he got impeached basically before Nixon got impeached. And it was said about President Ford that he couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. But anyway, so I wanted to say, just before we go into this, it was fascinating. I think it's so great. I think it's really what we're getting, and I think that is great. It's the level of you know, in this tax database, for example. In even the talk, there's a great combination of both concrete detail, but this other stuff. But things that I think even a decade ago would have just been, or 20 years ago, been so tough, us maybe on the less powerful side to find out, to discover, are now becoming into the light. I think it makes a huge difference. Obviously, there's still that question of how do we get political change? How do you change power? But I think it's a really great example. Yeah, so thank you very much. Okay, over to you, David. And to talk here, I think the last segue, we talked about heritage oil. Oil's a big issue, right? Or oil money is bigger than sugar, believe it or not. But it's another great commodity business. So let's talk to us about resources.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is David Mihai. I'm an economic analyst with the Natural Resource Governance Institute. We're a non-profit helping developing countries in realizing the full potential of their mining and oil wealth. And what I'm going to talk about specifically a bit today is some of the work we've been doing, which is really about how can we help citizens, civil society, work on monitoring how their oil and mineral is being taxed using open data, using new tools. This here is a copper mine in Congo. In the background, and what you see on the forefront is basically a financial sort of timeline of a typical mining project. In the first few years, you see a company investing billions of dollars in building such a mine, and then in the mine starts to produce, and especially commodity prices are high enough, then you see a decent return. And you know, as companies recover the losses they made in the start, then the profits that are generated from the mineral extracted can be taxed theoretically. And what we see in practice is countries often fall short of taxing that money to the full extent. Now, so what I'm talking about is how are these mines being taxed? What are the rules for this taxation, and are those rules being followed? And I think it fits in nice to what Ruth has been talking about. this was a discussion that was happening between the tax authority, the companies, maybe some experts, maybe the IMF gets a foot in the door, but that was it. This was way too technical, and there was not enough information and not enough data, not enough tools for other people to participate in this discussion. And we're trying to open up this discussion. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some tools that we built, and I'm going to show some examples of work using this kind of methodology. So one tool that we built, resourcecontracts.org, is a repository with over 1,000 oil and mining contracts from over 80 countries. These contracts really dictate the rules of the game, how they're being taxed, what specific corporate tax rate applies, what specific royalties apply, but also a lot of input and environmental clauses and all sorts of other key things. But this is not, what we built is not just like a Dropbox full of PDFs. What we did is we took all of the contracts and did some careful annotation. Where are the key tax terms? Where are the key environmental terms? So you can look that up, compare that. We also put rich metadata, meaning what are the company's signatories, so you can search this stuff better. What are the year it was signed? What are the countries it's in? And then we took all the text in the PDF, OCR this, scanned it, and now it's machine readable, so you can do text search within the contracts. Why is that useful? For example, you can do stuff like that. This, we just looked at where the word income tax appears in our over 1,000 contracts, the English ones. And what you see is there's not, for example, what you see right there is income tax related provisions are much more typical in the petroleum sector. They would have a special petroleum income tax in a lot of these contracts. And then you can also see it across years. So this is a powerful data-driven search tool for analyzing these contracts that were in the public domain, but often not really defined. They might be buried in a stock exchange listing or buried on a company website. Often when companies seek investment, they might go and say, okay, I'm seeking investors, I have to disclose this contract because it's material, it's important for my shareholders to know, but the citizens don't have a clue that important contract is out. Okay, second open data project we've been working on is called resourceprojects.org. What we find typically when you want to analyze a mine is you start scrolling across the web and you go through stock exchange filings, you go across company annual reports, you go to government websites, the government of DRC if the mine is in DRC, but also the company where the country where the company, the operator, it resides, because they might be disclosing some information. And we're trying to bring that all together in one page. So if you want to find out about a project, what are the relevant documents and what are some key data that relate to that particular project? This exists, proprietary databases, very expensive ones, around 50K plus a year, have this kind of information, but we want this data to be public and accessible to citizens. And so some of the key information that we're gathering is production data and then location, company. We're trying to link that information to other data sets. So if the company appears, Shell, Total, whoever, let's link it to Open Corporates, another database that looks at where it's incorporated and that kind of information. We have a contract, we link it to our own contract database, to the wider open contracting data sets that exist. And the other key piece of information, and one of the drivers behind this project, is tax payment data. Because a recent rule that which applies to all EU listed or registered mining or oil companies now have to disclose how much tax they pay for every single project they're part of across the world. So this is Total, the French oil company, and you see in 2015 in Argentina they paid $45 million, and in Angola for one project for Angola, different sums. And we have the same for Shell, and all of that company data starting trickling in this year. It really started to kick off this year, and by the end of the year, we're growing this database of tax payments. So contracts, payments, project data. Why are we doing this? Where do we want to get to with this? This is an example in Sierra Leone, a country where I worked for 2 years. And at the time in 2011, when I started working there was a big expectations, big iron ore mine just opened, and there was huge projections on how Sierra Leone is on the verge of becoming mining rich, and projections saying mining revenues are just going to ramp up rapidly. And what I did was, in retrospect, look at, okay, what were those initial projections done by the IMF and the government together, and looked at, okay, how much are the actual payments? And in 2012, things looked all right, but as soon as the company was supposed to pay big corporate tax, that never materialized. And part of it was the fall in iron ore prices, but the detailed looks showed that there was much more underlying problems, from cost overruns to complex structures that allowed discounted price of sales of the iron ore and other stuff. So again, looking at a projection from the government and putting it to scrutiny on, okay, how much of that boom are we seeing? Second example is from Ghana. It's where there was a big oil, the Jubilee oil field is the biggest revenue generating oil project in the country. And this was in late 2014 with my colleague in Ghana. We worked on building a simple tool the aim of it was oil prices were dropping rapidly. The budget at the time was prepared using $100 oil price. And as oil price was starting to fall, we thought, okay, let's have a look at, now it's 70 at the moment we were doing the analysis, how would that look like? Tool in Excel where you could plug in your own oil price and check how is that going to affect public finances. And all of the data we used, we took it all from these different data sets and put the whole thing in Excel and just shared it with parliamentarians, journalists, government officials in Ghana to have the discussion going. And things, when we built the model late in 2014, we felt quite confident that the model seems to capture retrospectively roughly in the right ballpark how much tax payments are being done. So at the time we felt, okay, this model seems to work. But then came 2015, we realized our model is way off. Even if we adjust for the oil price fall, because that continued, our model is still way off and still, although more conservative in 2015 than the original budget, it's still way above the actual payments that materialized. So we started asking questions, okay, why do we not see the same amount of tax that we calculated? And then turned out that these are balancing losses they're making in another project against the profits that they're accruing still on this new oil project, which again, the government and the tax authorities were not clearly aware that this was going to happen. The companies had their way of saying, this is within a provision in the contract. But at least we had that discussion open and started it, and we have to wait to see how that discussion ends up. But again, as civil society, we were able to make a public discussion around these revenue projections and the problems we see in that. Last example, slides are a bit off. Sorry, this is PC to Mac. So this is just a simple experiment running a bigger data set, because what we figured is we need a scalable model. One analysis on one project, it requires a lot of activists, and we're getting there, but it takes a while. So we started looking at in Angola across 15 oil blocks, all the tax payments for each block. How does the tax payment compare to the production value? The kind of data set the resource project is driving to build that at a global scale. And clearly there's a simple correlation between how much oil value is produced and how much tax is paid. This one is a bit more interesting of a graph. It shows that when oil prices were about $100, then per barrel, then the government of Angola was getting 55 of that in tax per barrel. And you can see how the fluctuation in commodity price affects the budget or the bottom line of Angola. And this one you can't see right, tells the story of looking at the individual field. Which field pays the most tax per barrel. How much is the government's share of the total revenue from a project? And again, looking at the correlations there between the size of the asset and the government share, but my interest is a lot on the outliers. What drives those deviations? Can we find something in the data that pops up? So that's sort of the agenda, one of the agendas that we're also working towards. So really, what's the conclusion of this? I think we have more and more methodologies to look at taxes, even with simple tools. And we have more and more data. We have contracts, we have payment data. We can start to ask questions and start to scrutinize those deals, whether the contracts are being followed, whether the contracts themselves, how far are they from the best practice. And we also have a community of people who are starting to look at these issues. And going back to the point, there's a change in power dynamics underlying this whole thing, where taxes can be scrutinized now with the tools that we're having. So that's the point I wanted to conclude on. Thank you so much, everyone, for this.
We can invite actually people to, I'm going to put out, if I invite business to come up to the front, that would be great. Right, do you want to turn off the possibly turn off? Yeah. Yes, you're not blind, by the way. So yeah, thank you very much. So I would like to thank you all very much. But who would like? Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Okay, just please. Okay, I've got. So this gentleman, I'll take a couple. So this gentleman, this gentleman, Paul, in a moment. Please, sorry, I can get your name.
Hi, my name's Dane Wright. I do research on local government, state government spending, and stuff like that. And one of the things that really puzzles me about really all the things we talked about, I don't understand why government is not in their interest to try to cooperate and prevent all these tax havens and companies sort of shifting their taxation to other companies. It seems to me that it would be in all of their interests to actually cut down on it. Why does it not happen?
Great question. I should also just say, in a moment, if you're interested in local government spending and central government, there's also Project Open Knowledge involved called Open Spending, which complements and relates to these. You should, I think at the back there is Moore Rubenstein. You might want to, you can catch or myself afterwards. But that's a great question. So I'm going to go that just in a moment. I'll answer. I'll take the second question. But it's basically as I get it, which is, whose interest this is in? Why does this happen? So great.
Okay, second question, Gianfranco, the scientist and data architect. On the on the tax treatment point, okay, we have much more visibility of doing great work collecting data, but I have the so what question. So what can we do? After all, the treatments were done by countries that have jurisdiction in the territory. They are free in theory. Perhaps the people who negotiated those were either corrupted or perhaps simply incompetent. After all, what can we do?
Great. Okay. Well, who would like to go first? Just like, or please go for it.
I kind of wanted to answer the first
Go for
question,
that, yeah.
but the second question was also very just, so maybe you can have a go at that one. But yeah, so in terms of like why does this happen and why doesn't everyone cooperate? It is a really good question. There's a philosopher whose name I can't remember, which is really annoying, but talks about regulation of various things and compares it to playing ice hockey, obviously an American guy, and says that regulation kind of can be seen to be a bit like everyone having to wear a helmet in a game. If one of you takes it off, you've got a massive. It's more dangerous. It's more risky for you, but you've got a massive. So the tendency is then for everyone to take them off, which then means everyone is on a level playing field again, but it's more risky, and uses that to make an argument for why regulation of financial markets and other things is a good thing. I think the same thing has happened with tax competition. And the whole way that the global tax system has happened, there was never any kind of grand plan for it. It's just popped up. when countries started to trade with each other all around the world, and lots of local rules have kind of built up and built up, and they've always built up from the perspective of people competing against each other. So in order to get to that, and you know, there's a massive race to the bottom on tax with people kind of undercutting kind of tax rates, and you've got tax havens competing for business as well. You do, in order to kind of bring that all into line, we do need a global agreement really, and that's one of the things we've been campaigning for, is having a global tax body at the UN or somewhere else that is accountable and that's overseeing all this stuff. But that's realistically not going to happen tomorrow. So, you know, tax treaties are something that countries can be kind of campaigning on and working on now, and we're hoping that if we as we are already managing to kind of get some wins, that it will kind of pick up speed and have knock-on effects and change the way that people think about these things, and we'll be able to build up to something that's a bit more sensible.
You guys want to come in on that as well?
We'll keep it moving, just because otherwise we've got a limited time and we've got more questions. So Vanessa will come back. So at the moment, it's almost to answer the second question. Go for it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. So when we talk about tax treaties, and like, especially tax treaties that were signed decades ago, and yet they might have been signed by free and accountable governments, they might not have been. But in any case, we can now hold our governments to account for the rules that they uphold. And if most of us in here don't know the rules in our tax treaties and don't know if we think they're fair, then it's very hard for us to hold these governments to account and make sure that policy is in line with the public will. And for example, in the UK treaty with Malawi, if UK companies bring back profits or repatriated earnings into the UK, we ban Malawi from taxing that payment, whilst normally taxing so-called dividends is standard, and that's something that we do here in the UK, but we don't tax it if it comes from overseas. So we don't tax it and we ban Malawi from taxing it. Now, this agreement, even if it would have been signed by a democratically elected, basically enforced government in Malawi, and then it's still up to us as people here in the UK and the Malawi population to access this information, to have the open knowledge, to look at our rules and say, do we think this is fair? I think us as citizens need to get more involved in tax politics, and we need to demystify it and make sure that the rules of the game are as we want them. And I think a lot of the time decisions have been made behind closed doors. Information has not been available for journalists, for civil society, or even for parliamentarians. And that is a big issue that we need to shift.
I think it's a great point. And I think just relating back to the original question, I mean, I do want to say, because we're going to be very kind of like, in a way, neutral about it, but if I understand in this issue, there are reasons some of this kind of stuff happens. I mean, one point I thought in your slides you had about kind of Google and I think Amazon. You could say, well, great, you've just been obeying the rules, but do you support more stringent rules? Because that's the kind of 64,000. You know, there is a reason sometimes these things exist, and my guess is that there's sometimes substantial lobbying. For example, in the US, there's substantial lobbying to reduce corporate taxes or other things like that. If we were actually just to look on that question, are there people who are particularly fighting on the other side right now, who are spending big bucks with lobbyists to have things go the other way? I mean, why is it that the UK government isn't willing to disclose what it's doing with Malawi? Is it just because they don't want to be hassled so much? Or I just wonder on those like Mossack Fonseca and others, is there any evidence there of is there stuff coming out of there of actual actionable to not only have that exist, but perpetuate it? To have that structures continue to exist from certain interested parties who aren't just Mossack Fonseca.
Well, I mean, a lot of these secrecy havens are tiny jurisdictions that don't make economic sense in a modern world, that they're going to be overlooked. So they have to artificially attract to them, and the way that they persuade the wealthy of the world to travel all that way or to buy services is by offering something they wouldn't get at home, and obviously that spiral, that level of tax competition or secrecy competition is common to the corporate structuring as well. And I think, I think it's interesting here in the UK, I mean, before the last general election, there was one of the pivotal moment was when a very large group of business leaders from multinationals went to Telegraph saying, we're seriously worried about Labour's tax policy. And, if you want investment in the UK, then you need to think twice about voting Labour. And for me, that was, which country are those leaders going to be saying, well, actually, we'd like to be paying a bit more tax here? Obviously, in every country, they're going to be saying, well, the neighbouring country, they've got quite a low tax, and they've got these sweetheart deals you can get. And if only you could be one of that, we'd put more investment in. So there's this fantastic gamesmanship going on, and the idea of countries sticking together is I mean, I still hope for that, but I mean, the competitive world we live in, the countries are so much debt in the Western world. The pressure to compete for inward investment is immense, and the way you compete is with these tax gimmicks.
That's got you. So just there, you kind of did allude at the end. So what I'm getting, if I just understood that correctly, is that yes, there are people. I understand the natural tax competition effect, but there are people who actively help kind of promote that, who are lobbying in this way to have the system perpetuated or developed. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is it isn't just that Democratic politicians. Having been involved with policymakers quite a bit, I have to say we have to kind of. I think we have it in. So I'm surprised we get bad politicians in the way that we think or treat them. I have to be honest. My experience of many of them is they have quite a lot of. They have a reasonable amount of integrity. They're often doing their best in a world where they're under a lot of pressure from different competing interests. So I'm just wondering that's what I was getting at. And that example, I mean, you can think of Switzerland or other places. There's active effort. It's not just kind of politicians, also a corrupt solicitor firm. There's a lot of pressure from multinationals or others to perpetuate this system. Is that right? You're going to say? Yeah, I really got that. One question I got then, and I'm abusing my chair, is one, I'm not an expert, but what about the one thing that can't relocate so easily is obviously consumption. Going back to the Google example, it's not good if Google sells stuff here in some sense. Most of these examples of big multinationals involve kind of weird transfer pricing of IP. Are there other approaches you could be sharing with us? And is there information that we should be having that would be giving us more power in those kind of proposals about different things, rather than just a global tax? Is it the UK should say we should move just to kind of like consumption taxation or something like that, which can't be relocated? Google's taxed on, I don't know how many British people like clicked on its ads or kind of thing. That's what I'm getting at. Is there any thoughts from the panel on that kind of thing?
I mean,
Then I'm going to go to Paul and next question.
On the consumption tax, just very quickly, yes, it's easier to tax at the consumption end, but if you look at the distribution of where most of the consumption happens and where your iPhone is being produced and where the metals and minerals in it come from, then if you want a fair distribution, or if you want a tax system that benefits the poorest, then taxing the iPhone where it's consumed is not going to get that. So yes, it's easier to implement, it's easier to administer, but the distributional effects might not be ideal.
Got you. Great point. Okay, who would like to ask a question? Paul, and is there anyone else who? If I take two? No? Okay, and then it's Paul.
So I'm Paul Mulberry, I look after data in the Government Digital Service in the Cabinet Office, and I thought it was really good speech, really good sort of saying. I really. I've got a question for Simon. So I've got the first bit, which was Simon, wasn't it? Yeah, it's Simon. The first bit was, so the examples, it was interesting to me that they stretch back in time.
Yes.
So presumably from that release,
yes,
you were able to trace back from those cases. I just thought that struck me as interesting.
Yeah.
But the real question was around, so what sort of policy shifts that would tackle some of this? So it was, what, 3 weeks, probably 3 weeks ago, less than a month ago, we did this anti-corruption summit hosted in the UK. But we also released the UK's Open Government National Action Plan from the Open Government Partnership. which looked at open contracts, had commitments in open contracts, and also about beneficial ownership for foreign companies, as well as the previous things we were going to do for beneficial ownership and transparency of that for UK companies. I'm interested in how would those policy shifts start to impact on that agenda, and where doesn't it quite reach to, and what are the other things that would be required from your perspective to get at that? It's a very interesting.
Well, I mean, I'm a problem finder, not a problem solver, by trade. But if I stray a bit away from that, though, I mean, I do think those initiatives are fantastic, and certainly even in the trawling back over the emails and the conversations that you see in the panel page, you definitely feel there's a background noise. They're whinging that it's not what it used to be. This game they're making, the regulators are. This is incrementally over time. We're having to be more and more innovative. It was great when you could do all sorts of certain things in, I don't know, the Seychelles, and then suddenly, things changed there, and unreasonably they got a bit tough. So we've had to move to Nui or something like that. And it's there is a, but I don't know the extent to which. I think it's been slowly improving. But there is a theory that it could just be cat and mouse, you're chasing it, or whack-a-mole, you try and bang it there and it pops up there. But on the point about these initiatives, I do think that they're great. But the way I see it is it's like you've got a bucket and it's supposed to hold water, and there's tons of holes in it. And these are all the analogies. The holes are loopholes that prevent the kind of transparency that you're trying to achieve, and they're scattered around these secrecy jurisdictions. And you can fix 90% of the it'd be a monumental task to fix 90% of the holes in the bucket. Even if you did that, the bucket still won't hold water, and you only need like one loophole to exist for the game to continue. And I mean, maybe that's terribly depressing. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd like to put a slightly more positive spin on things, if that's okay. Yeah, the Anti-Corruption Summit actually hasn't been campaigning on transparency for some time. We used to, but we did get involved after the Panama Papers with NGOs like Christian Aid and Oxfam, who've really been pushing this stuff. And it was very disappointing. We had a commitment in the GA several years ago now that Cameron was going to, was in the mind that he wanted to make the overseas territories and crown dependencies publish public registers of beneficial ownership so that shell companies couldn't be set up in them anonymously. And having hosted an anti-corruption summit in the UK after the Panama Papers and all of the personal implications in that and the kind of outrage and scandal around that, still didn't make good his promise on doing that. And there have been incremental steps towards doing that. We haven't got there. It's particularly a problem for developing countries, which is kind of our interest, because the shell companies, the information will be exchanged with HMRC and some other country governments. But I mean, we would argue that they shouldn't just be exchanged with tax authority. They should also be open. They should be open so civil society can scrutinise them, especially in the south when tax authorities are not well resourced anyway. But having said all that, which also sounds very bleak, I do think that there is reason for hope. If you look at tax justice, it was a non-issue. This stuff has been happening for years, and people weren't really angry about it. If you look at public pressure in the UK now and in lots of countries, people are really furious, and they're seeing this as being, one of the kind of key drivers of inequality. And progress is being made, and there are companies kind of coming out and saying, actually, we do want the rules to change, although I'm sure that there's a lot of lobbying going on behind the scenes as well. So I do think that, when you've got kind of strong civil society action and you've got people, you've got access to information, you've got people who are angry about it and feel like they can do something about it, then I do think that we're moving in the right direction. Although, it's a massive problem.
Well, I think so. I'm just giving this time. I think we're at time. It's 9 o'clock exactly. We go up and drink, you can go upstairs, actually, you can go outside. I just want to end, so I want to thank you again, all of you. Thank you so much for coming and giving generously of your time tonight to share with your expertise and knowledge. I really appreciate that. And thank you for your time and attention. And I hope you've learned something. And I think at the end, I think of always the Ecclesiastes sign that, you know, I return to the soaring of the sun, that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favour to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. And the one thing that made me think of listening to you is I read recently a very amazing biography of Robert Moses, who was involved in building a large part of New York City. And it's a fascinating, very famous biography because it's about 1,000 pages about the history of New York City. And one of the first things Moses got involved in was the kind of good government campaign. And like research today went out, at this point you couldn't even get, there was no New York City budget. This is 1910. New York City didn't publish a budget. You got to understand, New York was run by Tammany Hall, which was legendary for its level of corruption. In fact, just before the Great Depression, it was estimated something like 20 or 30% of the budgets went missing each year. Schools would get built in New York City and would fall down within 2 or 3 years because they'd been so shoddily built by the contractors. This was 20 years later still. But 1910, one of the things they discovered was the only thing that was mandated by law is that you had to publish, I think, in the Gazette, in the newspaper, what had been bought, like what the bid for a construction contract. So you had these middle class young men wearing white top kind of collars would turn up at construction sites and start counting sacks of cement. Because based on this, and based on the materials that they could estimate, they could work out how much was actually being spent on the construction site, and they published this stuff. The point of this story is that New York was very corrupt at that point, and they had an impact. In fact, you know, Moses was involved in this group, and then kind of sort of went to the bad side later on. But eventually, New York changed. New York, by the late 1920s, there was a famous story of a bad guy made good. A guy from the Tammany Hall sign became governor of New York, and it was that kind of story of like he was going to be allowed to change. He came from a very poor family, and he kind of was like the reverse Darth Vader. He kind of was bad and became good, and passed all kinds of stuff. And then famously, I don't know, one of the great other scandals is, you know, in 1932, you know, New York is in its knees in the Great Depression, and there's this huge public trial in which, you know, one of the best moments is someone has to explain how they ended up with $350,000, which in 1932 in New York is a lot of money. And he said he found it in a tin box. That was and so the group became known as the Tin Box Gang because they found, you know, for example, the mayor of New York at that time, Walker, basically was actually had this kind of mistress, ran his own kind of private nightclub in the middle of Central Park, basically just decamped to the south of France after. They weren't even convicted in this case. But my point is, New York today is not like that. New York today is not like that. And I think what's incredible with you guys here, and I will acknowledge you, and I will acknowledge, is that the people in Uganda who are fighting for this, is that it may seem slow, and it may seem often pessimistic, but I think there is progress. And when you talked about the bucket, that's what I thought of, which is if you've been in 1910 in New York, you thought, my God, we sorted out this, and then there's that, and my God, this is so corrupt, and how will we ever get around Tammany Hall, you know, and yet it did happen. And I think that is so in these areas, and I think in generally more in open data, which I think is both important in campaigning, by the way, but I think it's also this fundamental question of justice, actually, and access to resources in the 21st century. So thank you very much. I hope you'll stay and chat with us and go upstairs, and I hope you'll come to the next one, which I believe is the 14th it's going to be the 14th of September, Wednesday, I think the 14th of September. We're going to have a break for the summer, but if you want some more, remember, you can come to Berlin, 16th century July. But until September, come and join us if you want for a drink or something upstairs.
I'm going to say thank you to the speakers again.
Yeah.